shared their story, and I said, really, you should share that with people. Sid used to always say, he'd say, it doesn't take a lot. People have the wisdom within them. So if you just speak from what you know to be true, there's a good chance it's going to blossom it's going to open the flower. I don't know if we've talked since our last call of psychiatrists. Have we? Did I mention that? Or we've had our fourth call of psychiatrists, and from around the world, trying to get a community of psychiatrists, and it hasn't, and it's moving at its own pace, because we've had more than we had last week, but we had 7 of us, 2 from the United States, Dr. Bob Solomon, who's been involved for about 18 years with 3 principles, and myself. And then we had 3 from the United Kingdom, Dr. Rainey Bora and her husband Suraj, and a new doctor from a semi-retired child and adolescent psychiatrist. Then we have Frederick Kenneman from Sweden, who's just finishing his residency, which is exciting to have a young psychiatrist. And then we had a wonderful Angela from Italy, and just a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And it was just beautiful. But to hear, I could say who it was, but it doesn't matter. One of the psychiatrists, who had been a psychiatrist for many years, said, that he had envious thoughts that he let go about Frederick, because Frederick being so young and just starting his psychiatric practice. But he said, I also am more than that, just filled with gratitude. He said, because I used to, when a patient, whether it was in the hospital or in a clinical office, I always wanted to have hope in my heart that I could help them. People don't go into these fields without that desire and hope that they could be of help to people. But he said, so often I didn't have hope. When faced with what I was told was mental illness and brokenness and something lacking, I tried to convince myself to have hope where there wasn't hope. And I'm sure that the clients / patient experienced that lack of hope, which reinforced the lack of hope that they had, and the belief that they had that there was something lacking and something broken. And he said, fast forward to now, when a client comes in, whether I'm in the hospital or I'm in my office, and a patient walks in, and I find myself almost having tears in my eyes, because it was so beautiful what he shared. He said, now, whenever I'm with a client, I feel this incredible joy and excitement in my heart, because I see the present that they have inside of them, that I'm going to be able to be there while they unwrap it. This beautiful, beautiful present of mental well-being that they don't know is within them, that I get to be a witness to their unwrapping of that present. At that moment, I had this thought go before my mind. And of course, Sid used to say, it's already done. It's all done. It's all done. But I had this thought that what will it look like when every single encounter between a mental health educator, whatever names are given to the people, mental health person, and a quote client, when the teacher is filled with that feeling that that doctor had, that, wow, this is exciting. I get to help this person unwrap the beautiful present of their mental well-being, of their love and understanding. That's exciting. That's truly exciting. I shared with Elizabeth, and she said that I didn't share it before, and so I'm going to share it. I got this from a person in a European country, or I guess actually in the Middle East. You know, I am embarrassed as I said that because, you know, people in the United States, people from other countries, sometimes they say, well, you know, anything west of New York is what Western United States to me, or things like that. And yeah, I felt kind of silly in my geography there. But this woman sent me this letter, and it's short. And I know that I tell these stories, and I know that many of you have experienced the same too. And it's so easy to attach the stories to me, and that's what I did my best to get my ego out of the way when I was at the university in West Virginia Medical School, to try to have people see that it wasn't about Bill Pettit. Yeah, I may have whatever they call charisma. I call it my dad sold used cars for 35 years, so I call it my used car gene. So that's supposed to be a joke, but I may have a used car gene, and I may have charisma, but it's not. That it sometimes has gotten in the way of my therapeutic power rather than a cause of it. And it's in the message. It's in the message of hope. It's in the message of truth that is waiting to be uncovered. So this is a letter that I got. So she said, "Dear Dr. Bill, I just wanted to tell you." For some reason, I'm really touched today. "I wanted to tell you about a young client who was in a mental hospital when I met her after a lifetime of suicide attempts," as we talk about suicidal thoughts today, "drinking and self-harm. And now 1 year later is out. She's medication free. She's working with kids with disabilities, and she just got accepted to college. The school needed her to get a letter from her psychiatrist, and she just called to tell me about the interview. The doctor couldn't believe how well she is doing and listed off the 10 diagnoses that she doesn't have anymore." Remember how we've said during this period of lectures, or whatever they are, presentations, the diagnoses are an attempt to describe where a person is, but has nothing to do with who the person is, as divine energy having taken a form. When I hear your stories, I believe you. I've always believed you. But this girl is right here for me to see the miracle. Feeling very grateful, and thank you for sharing all your wisdom, which we all have the same wisdom, right? And we call it a miracle, but maybe it's just the way it's meant to be. Start helping everybody open their presence. So when I talked about, and this was a lady that had many suicidal attempts, evidently. When I first, these are some of the things that I hope to cover that just came to mind. I started reflecting the last couple of days on this talk, and I thought about the source, where suicidal thoughts come from, the effect on others, relationship to past trauma or past experiences. What about the relationship to homicidal thoughts? You see, so all too often homicides and then suicides. How we understand this from the three principles understanding, and how to deal with it. What's the approach? So I started reflecting myself in my life, and I I realized that again, I go back to Tolstoy's quote about families. It just seems to capture a powerful truth, where he said in front of Anna Karina that happy families are all happy in the same way. Dysfunctional families are all dysfunctional in their own unique way. Happy families are all happy in the same way, in that they're lighthearted, they're generous to each other, they're grateful, they're kind, they don't take things personal when somebody's in a low mood. They know how to ride the waves of people's ups and downs in the families, and they see each other's innocence, and they know when to keep their mouth shut and when to listen and when to talk. And doesn't mean that they ignore things, but they talk about things when the feeling is right. And yet, he says, every dysfunctional family is dysfunctional in its own way. And I started thinking of, one can get to suicidality. Happiness is the same way. It's just understanding what you are and how you're creating your experience. So the path to happiness, to me, is the most reliable one that I've seen, is understanding the spiritual nature of the three principles. Understanding that we are divine nature, we are that which was there before the Big Bang, having taken form like everything else, except unlike the rocks and the mountains, as far as I know, we can be conscious of that we are divine energy, and that we're using divine energy through mind, consciousness, and thought to create our experience, one thought at a time, from the time we are born till the time we die. And so I thought back of my experience of suicide, and I remember I was in the seminary for 2 years. I think I've shared that with you before, that I was in the Catholic seminary, and I was going to be a Trappist monk, which psychological testing said that I had no business being there, that it wouldn't have been good for me or for them. So that was a blessing. But one of my seminary classmates, I heard later that he had committed suicide. He was a year ahead of me. He was very driven. And I think that drivenness is one of the ways that can take people to a point where they just can't live up to their expectations. I think of a young woman that went to an Ivy League school, and there was a big article written about her in Sports Illustrated that I might have mentioned. She was first team All-American field hockey and ice hockey her freshman, sophomore, and junior year. She was a beautiful young woman. She had a 4.0 grade point average for the first 3 years in this Ivy League school. And in her senior year, she committed suicide. And my heart just goes, I mean, for anybody. I mean, this is a woman who obviously was gifted and might well have been might have broken the glass ceiling in the United States and been the first woman president. And yet, because of a lack of understanding, innocent lack of understanding, she ended her life very early. I think of, in medical school, a fellow was in one of the fraternity houses in Chicago, just down the street. Nice guy, seemed easygoing. And I heard that a year or two later that he took his life, and I have no idea. I remember a bank friend of our family, my folks' family. I remember when he went out into the woods and shot himself, and he had evidently embezzled some money from the bank. And I think that what happens sometimes is when people have done things that are beyond their moral values, what they consider to be the right way to be, the way they want to be, instead of seeing their psychological innocence and understanding that we can all get lost, they can't forgive themselves. I think I might have mentioned that from Vietnam in the United States, we lost 58,000 men and women were killed. And in 1996, 97, 20 years ago, the estimate was that 300,000 more had committed suicide, which is 5 times how many were lost on the battlefield. I know they had to shut down a lot of the PTSD programs that they had, 30-day programs, because the suicide rates were so high. And yet nobody saw that it was, they shut down the programs, but somehow they had no alternative to taking people back into their very pain that was from their lack of understanding they were still experiencing from past events. I remember a sad case where there was a beautiful young high school woman basketball player in South Dakota who happened to be like 6 feet 6 inches tall or 6 feet 5 inches tall. But she couldn't deal with the differences of her related to her peers, and she also took her life. And it seemed to be related to not being able to accept that. So I guess my point is that there's many, many paths. But if we remember what we've talked about here, that psychiatric symptoms are misunderstood gifts. I know that's a strange statement to say to a lot of people. And so I actually do look people right in the eyes and I tell them, your suicidal thoughts are your friends. They go, pardon me? I said, they are your friends. They are your friends. And the way that they are your friends they are your friends just like a sign that says in 100 feet, there is a big hole called in 100 yards called the Grand Canyon. And if you keep going as fast as you're going to end up in the Grand Canyon. That sign is the last ditch effort to keep you from trying to drive over the cliff. Now, here's the deal, folks. There had been signs for the last 50 miles. Grand Canyon ahead, slow down. Cliff ahead, slow down. Sadly, as Dr. Pransky is apt to say, that for some people, death is an early warning sign. It's not that it's an early warning sign, but if we don't understand the road signs, then before we know it, we're going over the cliff. And I thought, that's why they have international road signs, isn't it? That are not language, because if I was in Denmark, or if I was in Israel, or if I was in France even, sadly, well, some Latin languages I may have a chance because of all my years of Latin, but if I was in many countries and it was giving me words about the signs were in writing, in Denmark writing, or Swedish writing, or Israeli writing, or in let alone in Chinese or Japanese symbols, or in Farsi, I'd be screwed. But that's why they put it in things that everybody can see. I remember coming down to the Dead Sea and seeing the sign that had it was a warning sign. You'll see warning sign in the United States that it's a deer crossing. Well, this was a warning sign that there were wild camels in the area, and there was a camel sign, But I don't know Israeli, but I knew that I had to watch out for wild camels. I could see by the sign. And there are universal signs that we're headed towards suicide, suicidal thoughts. And the earliest signs are the ones we've spoken of. Our mood starts to go down. And our anxiety level starts to go up. And we have some pain somewhere in our body. Those are the three most common. Because as we activate the stress response that we've talked about, that's meant to be activated once every 24 to 72 hours for up to 15 minutes, up to 30 minutes. And after that starts having deleterious effects, or at least making the body try to stop the effects it starts to have. Our mood goes down. If we continue, we will find ourselves irritable. The signs getting a little brighter red. Anxiety gets worse. People start getting panic attacks. Now we not only have pain, but we have sleep disturbance. We're getting louder and louder messages. You've got to stop doing what you're doing. Please. And then we start feeling disconnected, not only irritable and depressed, but now we just feel totally disconnected from people. We're angry and irritable, but now we have trouble feeling connection to people. And now we're so anxious that we're doing obsessive compulsive rituals and doing things to try to relieve our anxiety. And sometimes we dissociate and lose periods of time. And then now we've had sleep disturbance and pain, and now we have memory problems. And the whole summary of that is that we start to feel a greater and greater level of dis-ease, what I'll call pain, emotional pain. And it makes sense when you think about it that if a person doesn't understand what they are and how they're creating their experience, that as the pain gets worse and worse and worse, the computer brain is going to at some point throw out the option of suicide. And it makes sense. It's logical. It's saying you have innocently underlined, please hear 100 times innocently in bright, bold letters. You have innocently misused these three gifts in a way that you have created so much pain that it's getting unbearable. And we've talked about some of the ways that that we call mental disorders in this big book, this DSM-5 book, or of 800, 900 pages, or the ICD-10 book, that people start to go to alcohol to get some relief. At least when I'm drunk, I'm not tormented by my thinking. At least when I'm high, I'm not tormented by my thinking. Trying to get some relief, at least when I starve myself, or when I eat and throw up, or when I hoard, or when people find some externalizing behavior that gives them some temporary relief. There was a thing with people with borderline personality disorders, and I think it was a huge study. I think it might have been from France. And they showed that many of them had many adverse childhood events. Again, if we don't understand events that they had, if you had more than 7 childhood events, your suicide risk was 51 times greater than the average person with no adverse events. And it's interesting when we talk about hurt people, we've always said that. That's what helps people at least look towards psychological innocence. There's a study that showed that young people, and it was from I think it might have been from Denmark. It was 476,000 people followed for 20 years. And they were people that had an excessive amount of adverse childhood adverse events. And then they divided the ones up that were convicted of violent offenses from their teenage years, 13 to 17, versus people with the same amount of adverse childhood events that had no violent offenses. And the ones that had violent offenses had times 800% higher risk of completed suicide. Well, what does that mean to me? It goes along with the studies that show that bullies have the equal amount of rate of depression and suicide as people that are bullied. Because if I don't know that there is only one place that emotional pain can come from, and it's not from what other people say or do, it is from what I do moment to moment with these gifts. If I don't know that, then there's an infinite number of ways that my state of mental well-being can be taken from me. I want to say that again. And it's no should. It's no should. If I don't know that the only source of emotional pain in my life is from the person in the same underbritches that I'm in, there's an infinite number of people in their own underbritches and in circumstances in the world that I'm giving the power to take away, innocently, to take away my mental well-being. And I spoke earlier this morning to a young man who's a computer expert, and he said, it seems to me that it's not binary, it's not a 1 or a 0, that it's a range. And I said, well, that's interesting, because I see it as binary. Now, but here's what I think gives the illusion that it's a range. That what I see for myself and for other people as they've learned the principles is that at some moment they turn around from all of my life stress is caused by other people and circumstances. And they get turned around suddenly and they go like maybe the person that you talked to last night, Elizabeth, that suddenly sees a world in a different view and goes, wait a minute, it's my thinking and what I'm doing with it. And we have this great awakening that our source of stress is not from the outside, but from the inside. But I will tell you that most of us, myself included, then we have a pile of circumstances that are exceptions to that rule. So if I were to experience this kind of loss, financial or personal or employment or whatever, or loss of somebody, loved ones, then in that case, my experience of pain is not being caused from within me by my thinking. It's being caused by the external circumstance. Now, saying that it is natural to have that experience seem like it's coming from the outside is true. But to the degree that one knows that it isn't going from there, that it's coming from the inside, the trust in divine mind and in wisdom to bring you through whatever experience there is in life with grace. That's very different experience, because to the degree that you really know that, and maybe that's what's incremental, the knowing of that, there is nothing that you fear. Nothing, because you start going through life without fear, because you know that you have as part of your beingness, a wisdom that will, and a healing energy that will take you through anything. If we don't know that, however, poverty, financial collapse, failed marriages. When I first, my late wife and I were divorced for actually 3 years before we got back together. And shortly after met Mr. Banks and had a whole change the last 18 years of our marriage, I had suicidal thoughts. I had failed my marriage, and I knew that a good part of it was my own fault. And so there are people that have come back from war, and a lot of the suicides are related to what they call moral injury, where people in retrospect have done things that they can't forgive themselves for. And they don't see their psychological innocence. And they're unable to forgive themselves. I was struck today by 2 studies. One is that in the United States in 2015, and I'll do one, and then the other one is from Denmark, interestingly, again. But 2015, there were 44,193 suicides a year. And that was up from 25% from 1999. A 25% increase in the United States. Not a 3%, not 2.7%, not 1 point, not a decrease, 25% increase from 1999. 1.3 million attempted suicide, 2.7 million had made plans, and 9.7 million people admitted to strongly considering suicide during the previous year. The cost is incredible. The human cost is unmeasurable. You know, the United States and Australia are the only 2 countries studied by the Gates Foundation of 195 countries that had suicide as in the top 10 causes of their death rate. Interesting, the United States and Australia, if I remember correctly. Now, I saw an article from Denmark, which was interesting because in the last 2 decades, now I looked later and it was like 2006 or 7, so it's 10 years ago. But in Denmark, the suicide rates were actually decreasing. They were declining, especially among women in Denmark. They were declining substantially. And all except the very young, which was stable, and the very old, there was a slight increase. But in the United States, one of the biggest increases are in adolescent women, adolescent young girls. Anyway, it's important, I guess. It's so important that we find a way to help people realize that when you start having suicidal thoughts, it is your friend. It lets you know what you've innocently been doing with this gift of thought. You've innocently created so much internal pain that your computer is saying, Bill, have you noticed how bad you're feeling? Yeah, pretty bad. Have you noticed that any hope that it's going to get better? No, I don't see any chance that it's getting better, and I can barely tolerate the pain anymore. I have a solution. It's called suicide. If people can start to see, if we can show people that it's not the sign that they've got some mental illness, that it's a sign of innocently what they've been doing with this beautiful gift of thought. And as I was preparing for this, there were a few quotes from the missing link that I wanted to share. The first one I've shared many times. All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any other's. Only to the degree of psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. So what does that mean? That means that somebody who's having active suicidal thoughts of taking their life has the same connection and the same mental well-being as the person who's not. It's just that they've gotten lost, huh? They've gotten lost. In the silence of our minds lies creative incubation, bringing the wisdom and the joy that we all seek. In the silence of our minds. It reminds me of the lady that, again, I might have mentioned this, a lady, client of mine, who brought in from her spiritual calendar a little saying. And it said, on the saying was, human beings are the only of God's creatures that go faster when they're lost. Elizabeth, have I said that before here?
You have, but that's always worth hearing again.
Human beings are the only of God's creatures that goes faster when they're lost. If you're lost, it means you've been going in the wrong direction. So if you go faster, are you going to get closer to home or further away? It makes no sense. If you watch animals, when they are lost or don't know where to go, they stop. They listen. I think I've shared, I watched our chipmunk on our porch back in Michigan one time for almost 15 minutes on a Saturday morning. And he's checking it out, seeing what would be the best move for a chipmunk on this Saturday morning to do next. I watched some squirrels, some gray squirrels out in Minnesota when I was out. Same thing, sitting. Oh yeah, I got it. Off they go. What do? We run around in circles, both physically and mentally, and then wonder why we're feeling more and more lost. And if I don't know that I am wisdom in disguise and have access to that wisdom 24/7, what am I going to go to? I'm going to go to my personal intellect. And by the way, here's a little secret. What got us lost in the first place? Could it be listening to our personal intellect? There was a character on Saturday Night Live in the United States, which can be very disrespectful and some people get offended by it. But please, if I offend anybody, please forgive me as human frailty. But there was this character, and I can't say the comedian, I can see him, but I can't say, and he played the church lady. And he was very righteous. He was dressed up like this real righteous church lady. And the answer to everything was Satan, right? Everything was Satan. And so, one of the ladies there, actress who had been in a movie that supposedly she was in this movie and she had no underbreeches on in the movie when she's being interviewed by the detective and she says, well, he said, now, what could have given you the idea to take that role? Could it be Satan? Right? So even had Santa Claus on, given the Christmas season, church lady had Santa on. So she goes over to the bulletin board and she writes Santa, S-A-N-T-A. And she takes the N and she moves it over to the end and says, well, now, Santa, what does this spell? Looks like Satan, right? So as would sit with my clients, I would say, well, let's see here. You were doing good, and now then you weren't doing good. Let's see. Could it have been thought? So instead of Satan, I'd always say, let's see now, let's have another one. You were doing good, and then you were all anxious and depressed. Let's see here. Could it be thought? I know Elizabeth has got her hands over her face, like, I can't believe he's doing this. But you try to keep it lighthearted, but that's the only thing that can take us away from what we are. and the gifts that we've been given is innocent misuse of the power of thought. I'm going to read a couple of more, and then I'm going to take questions and comments or whatever. Again, page 17, Sid just says the same things over, huh? Hoping that this one will get in. Everyone in this world shares the same innate source of wisdom, but it is hidden by the tangle of our own misguided personal thoughts. But it is hidden by the tangle of our own misguided personal thoughts. All feelings derive and become alive, whether negative or positive, from the power of thought. The brain is biological. The mind is spiritual. The brain acts like a computer. Whatever you put into it is all you get out. If you know that, you're not frightened by your brain. Huh? As consciousness descends, as we get caught up in the content of our personal intellect in a frightened state, we lose feelings of love and understanding and experience a world of emptiness and bewilderment and despair. And as consciousness ascends, we regain purity of thought and in turn regain feelings of love and understanding. I used to have this thing where I would talk about people, I'd make a little human outline of what I thought was a human being, but people would ask me, was it a starfish? Or, my art abilities are not real great. And then I would put a little thing in the middle and I would say, this is a picture of our ego, but I'm going to label it their happiness invested thoughts, HIT, hit thoughts. They're any thoughts that if they come to mind and we take them in as serious, that we can't be happy. So if I've attributed my happiness to something that I've already done 20 years ago, then I can never really be happy. If something that happened to me or somebody else did to me 30 years ago, how can I be happy? Because of that thought, that memory. And so what I realized is that there are some people, people say, gosh, if I was ever impoverished and on food stamps, or if I was ever quadriplegic, or if I was ever this, or if I was ever that, if I got the diagnosis of ALS, I would take my life. It's because people don't trust that there's an experience inside in any circumstance that can be very, very rich. And we either live in fear or we live in knowing and in love. Anyway, I could read these. You know these forever. The one I will say, thought is the missing link. Thought is the missing link between mental health and mental illness. Thought between happiness, missing link between happiness and sadness. It's so innocent, and I know I'm speaking to the choir, but suicidality is it's the last alarm system. Suicidal thoughts are the last alarm trying to let us know that we're going the wrong way, that we're misusing this beautiful gift of thought in a way that is creating so much pain that now life seems unbearable. And to us, it doesn't seem that way with lack of understanding. It seems like it's coming from the circumstances that we're facing. It seems like it's because X, Y, and Z has happened, or I've lost this person, or this has happened to me financially, or X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop while I'm behind.
So we actually do have a question, and on this occasion, I feel like I'd like to invite Jennifer to talk to you directly. She has a daughter who has been taking ice, that drug, and has had suicidal thoughts and voices in her head, and she just would really love the chance to talk to you about her daughter. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
So I'm going to unmute you, Jen, and go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Thank you for letting me have this brief moment with you. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
My daughter met a guy earlier this year, and she gravitated to him and spent a lot of time there. And because of that, she was introduced to ice, and she ended up coming home in August with her face, full of mite sores. I've been dealing with her beliefs that she's schizophrenic, her suicidal thoughts. She rang me up the other morning, with all these suicidal thoughts. And, I'm grateful for this understanding, but I would love to hear what you have to say on this.
About what is it that you're specifically asking?
How's the best way that I can, I'm doing my best to communicate with her from a 3P perspective, but then she'll also see me as her mother, so sometimes she sort of discounts it, that, I have any understanding about drugs and how drugs affect you. And what else? And last night we were talking, and it was about one that I just don't understand, but it's mainly all these voices. And because she's adopted and we don't have any history on her family, she thinks she might have schizophrenia because all the symptoms came on so fast, all the voices in her head, and she still believes that all these voices in her head are all true.
And tell me your first name again.
Jennifer. Jen.
Jenny, your experience with the principles is fairly extensive. Mr. Banks's books and tapes and stuff.
I went to Pransky's pro training earlier this year, and I have a really great mentor in Fiona Lukes here in Australia. So she's been giving me a hell of a lot of guidance.
Okay.
And Liana even spoke to Fiona a couple of weeks ago, but I think because I've been coached by Fiona, she doesn't want to have anything to do with her. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay. Have you read any of Mr. Banks's books or?
All of them.
All of them? Oh, good. And watched his videos and stuff?
All of them.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, tell me if I hear your question correctly, that obviously you've got somebody there that you're talking to, and that but you're wondering, what can I do? How can I be of help? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. These are tough. I've had these many times in my life, and the answer is not always easy for people to hear. Number one is even that in the end, you don't have the power whether or not somebody else takes their life or not. We don't. I know a mother that was so worried about her daughter that was both with depression and eating disorder that it appeared that she was going to die, and the mother herself was so incapacitated with worry that it was starting to affect her health. And suddenly, as her realization deepened of the principles, she realized that she was part of the problem. That people think worry has something to do with love, and it doesn't. And so she very, I don't know whether she verbalized it, but she let her daughter know that she realized that she didn't have any control over whether she ended up taking her life or died, but that starting that day, she was no longer going to worry about her. She was going to take all of the energy that she had and just love her and be available and be kind and and consider every day a gift until she didn't have her anymore. Her daughter fully recovered. And her daughter told her that the day that you let go of worry released a tremendous burden from my heart. And it allowed me to heal. Because as your child, I could feel all the pain that you were in because of my troubles. And I was doing the best I knew how. But now I had it on top of that, the burden of your worry. And once I didn't have that, I was able to allow the healing to occur within myself. So and there's no should in this, but the answer is for you to find the only person's well-being that you have control over is your own. As to find the deepest level of peace that you can. Because it is in that level of peace and understanding that neither I nor George Prince, no anybody people could point you, but I will never think that I can tell people what to do, because it's your daughter and you love her. And in a state of peace and joy, you will hear wisdom. And you will know exactly what's the best thing you can do within the limits of what any of us can do for anybody else. Does that resonate, that there's truth there?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I believe I'm in a really good place, so
Good.
that
Good.
if I do get a phone call, and she starts going into the past, I make sure I just bring her back to the now, and just, reassure her that everything's okay. So
That may be the thing to do sometimes, and that may not be the thing to do. Sometimes she may just need a mother to listen to her, to truly listen to her, until she's completely through. My experience is when people feel that they've been totally listened to, and they've been totally listened to.
Hello everyone, my name is Jyoti Sharma,
Then after they've felt totally listened to, then they're ready to listen. Does that make sense? But
yes.
so often, out of our insecurity and fear, we try to bring people back to the present, or we reassure them or whatever. And I've had to learn this. My wife is a much better listener than I am. Sometimes the answer is to just listen. And so with my children, I think I've gotten so much better of not teaching when I don't have a student, of truly just listening and loving. And then I can ask if they want to hear some thoughts I've had. And if they say, yeah, Dad, I'd love it. Or they say, not right now, Dad, but it's really been nice to have you listen to me. Thank you. I think I'm going to be better. So does that ring true too? That maybe
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
and you'll know. And I'm not saying don't bring her back. There will be time, but you will know whatever you're doing, whether you're doing it from fear or worry or concern versus just a quiet place of wisdom. Because it always has a different feeling.
Yeah.
Does that resonate? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Watching, I have children that are 40 and 42 and 40 and 33 and 32, and parenting doesn't stop, especially with my wife having passed away. But I've learned to just listen. And then the funny thing is, when I've truly, truly listened, it seems like that old saying, people do not care what you know until they know that you care. Truly know that you care. And it seems like truly deep listening to another person is one of the ways that, not as a technique, but it just is a way that we express our respect for what the other person's going through, and a real desire to try to understand it in their terms, from their eyes. And then if they want to hear from us, then we offer that. but you realize it's just they'll let you know, and they may say no, thank you, but then they may call you up 2 or 3 days later and say, Mom, do you have one of those books that you talked about that I could just look at? Or you never know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, my heart goes out to you, and for whatever my prayers are worth, they're with you and your daughter in this journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I wasn't sure whether there was anybody that she would be able to talk to, or even, yeah.
Well, I see a lot of people from all over the world, and I sometimes what I've done with people whose children have had psychotic episodes. By the way, schizophrenia is just a construct. It's just people have created such a painful world that they have to go to another world, and all hallucinations are thoughts with special effects. We do not experience anything ever in our life other than a thought, one thought at a time. Some of them are fancier and have more decorations, and you can call them hallucinations, but they're just thoughts with special effects. Now, what I've done recently with some people these happen to be sons, I think one daughter, is I made a contract to meet with the parent, and the child just sat there. They had no obligation at all. They just sat while I did a session with the parent. Now, what's interesting is that something powerful has happened. The last one was a son that had just come out of the hospital, psychotic and in a manic state, and was talking about suicide. And she said after the session, she went down and the grandmother said something and he laughed. And she hadn't heard him laugh for weeks and weeks and weeks. Because why? Because just sitting there listening, if that wisdom if that present is there inside of everybody, it's inside of everybody. There's no exceptions, and it doesn't go away. So just sitting there, that person had that experience of that being touched, and they wanted to learn more, So yeah, that's an option, whether it's with me or somebody else that you have faith in, but that you can do. But that way, there was no burden on the person. At the end, I said, was this helpful? And this young man said, yeah, somewhat, it was. And I said, do you have any questions or thoughts you wanted to share? And he said, no. But, so there was no obligation. He felt no pressure. So I think that sometimes, because people there's nobody that doesn't want to be at peace. I haven't met that person yet. I've met people that have given up hope that they can get there, but not anybody that doesn't want to be there, including your daughter. And by the way, you might know, I've raised 2 of our 4 children were adopted.
No, I didn't know that.
My wife and I, every time we adopted a child, 6 months later, she got pregnant. And we almost did it a 3rd time. But, yeah. At 43 and 40, we went back 7 years after our first one, and because we still had no more children, and they refused because we were too old, and then they decided we weren't. And so we got a little girl she's just a beautiful woman, every inside out, every way you could say. She's half Puerto Rican and half Irish. And I had a really nice day or two with her biological father not too long ago, and I just tell him I'm so grateful to he and the biological mother that they gave her life. But then, so 6 months later, my wife at 41 got pregnant with our last daughter. So we at 2 years later, we thought about adopting again, and I said, yeah, I don't know. We probably would have another one, and I'd be 70 when they're graduating from high school. So anyway, yeah.
So we've come to the time that last conversation with Jen. I think I'd really like your permission, Jen, to be able to share that with people. because what I heard Bill speaking to is that feeling that we all have inside when we really see someone suffering and we want to help. And I think that what Bill speaks to there is true as a mother, as a friend, as a concerned person. A few people commented, Bill, how beautiful and deep and powerful your response was. And it was just deeply touching, and to really I don't know, I just feel very moved by it. So is that okay with you, Jen, for us to share that with people? Because there's something very
maybe you and Jen could talk separately without all the 30 people on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point. Sorry, everyone else. So just what an incredible, beautiful way to end, how we can serve people by just getting in touch with our own well-being and being filled with love and understanding.
Yeah, it's always the answer. It's not complicated. Sid used to say, people would say, Sid, I would listen to you if you didn't have it be so simple. And Sid would say, well, I could try to make it more complicated, but it's not. It's not.
No, it's beautiful.
So send me the link so that if I'm able to, I'd love to listen in next week.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're going to have Pete Bailey. We're going to have Andrew Bridgewater, who is a psychiatrist himself, actually a clinical psychologist who suffered from suicide and depression, and Becky Boseman, who was traumatized as a child, kidnapped, and also suicidal at times in her life. So they're going to tell their story. So I will send you the link. We'd love to have you along.
Sure.
Dr. Bill.
Well, I certainly, in my depression days, thought myself to where I was considering that a number of times. So I know what it's like to feel so disconnected and lost that it doesn't seem like there's any other solution but to quit the game. So, but I've had people, interestingly, I've had people that have jumped off bridges, and one fella said, as soon as I let go, I said, oh shit, this was not a good idea. What was I thinking? He happened to survive miraculously, but okay.
So we'll say good night for now. Jen, if you want to stay on, that would be great. And then everyone else, hopefully see you next week, where we'll hear some more stories of hope for real change. So good night, everyone. I'm just going to unmute you all.